A 4-month-old baby girl named Isla lay in her cot at 2 in the morning last Thursday and began to cry. Her mother Rachel stood in the hallway listening and trying to decode the sound. Rachel had downloaded 3 different apps on her phone. Each one promised to translate her baby's cries into specific needs: hungry, tired, pain, wet, nappy. Each app gave a different answer every time. She had also read 2 best-selling books about infant cry patterns. One said a short rhythmic cry means hunger. The other said that same pattern means loneliness. Rachel did not know which book was right, so she stood in that hallway doing what millions of parents do every single night. She guessed. And she felt like a failure for guessing because every expert told her she should just know. This video is for educational purposes only and does not replace professional advice. If you have concerns about your baby, please consult a qualified child psychologist or pediatrician. Here is what nobody told Rachel. Here is what nobody is telling you. A team of researchers recorded nearly 40,000 cries from 24 babies over their first 4 months of life. They collected 3,600 hours of audio. They classified every single cry by what actually stopped it. Then they tested whether adults could identify the cause from the sound alone. The answer was no, not mothers, not fathers, not trained nurses, not even artificial intelligence trained specifically on those recordings. Nobody could reliably tell why a baby was crying from the sound. That finding should change everything you believe about parenthood. Because if the cry itself does not contain a label for its own cause, then every app and every book that promises you a translation is wrong. And if those tools are wrong, then every parent who feels incompetent for not instinctively knowing what their baby needs is feeling shame that was manufactured by an industry selling a lie. That is what we are going to unpack today. Not just why you cannot decode a cry by ear, but what your baby's cry is actually telling you. Because it is telling you something, just not what you expected. I am going to walk you through 3 things. First, the science that dismantled the cry translation myth. Second, what a baby's cry genuinely communicates. Third, what this means for how you respond tonight. By the end of this video, you will never listen to your baby cry the same way again. And you will stop blaming yourself for not understanding a language that does not work the way anyone told you it does. Let us start with the myth. For decades, parenting books have taught that babies produce distinct cry types. A hunger cry sounds one way, a pain cry sounds another. A tired cry has its own special pattern. The idea is appealing because it turns chaos into a system. If you can match the sound to the cause, you feel competent. If you cannot match it, you feel broken. That binary has tormented parents for generations. Early studies in the 1960s suggested that mothers and trained nurses could identify cry types without any other context. Those studies were small. They compared extremely different situations like vaccination pain versus mild fussiness. When the cries were closer in intensity, the accuracy collapsed. Parents could tell the difference between a scream of pain and a gentle whimper. But they could not distinguish hunger from loneliness or tiredness from overstimulation. Think about what that means. The only time you can reliably tell why your baby is crying is when the answer is already obvious. A sharp scream after a jab at the clinic. That is pain. You did not need training. But the cries that keep you awake at night, the ones that start at 2 in the morning when nothing visible is wrong, those are the cries no human being on earth can reliably decode from sound alone. The researchers who analysed those 40,000 cries confirmed it with numbers. They trained machine learning algorithms on the full dataset. The algorithms could not classify cry causes accurately either. An algorithm does not get tired, it does not get anxious. It processes pure acoustic data without emotion, and it still failed. That tells you the information is simply not encoded in the sound the way people believe. Now here is where the trap closes on parents. Because there is an entire industry built on the opposite claim. Apps that promise to translate cries in real time, books that list cry types like a dictionary, online courses charging hundreds of pounds to teach you the 5 cry sounds every mother should know, devices you clip to the cot that flash different colours depending on what they claim your baby needs. None of these products are based on rigorous science. The study that analysed 40,000 cries found no acoustic basis for the categories these products sell. The categories do not exist in the signal. But the guilt these products generate is very real. Because when a parent buys an app that says hungry and they feed the baby and the baby keeps crying, they do not blame the app. They blame themselves. They think something is wrong with them. They think they are missing something obvious. They think a better mother would know. And that thought is the trap. That thought is the product these companies are actually selling. Inadequacy dressed as information, shame packaged as science. And it works because parents are exhausted and desperate and willing to pay anything for certainty at 3 in the morning when the crying will not stop. So if the cry does not tell you why your baby is crying, then what is it actually doing? This is where the science gets genuinely fascinating, because the cry is communicating, just not the thing you were told. The same study that debunked cry translation found that baby cries carry 2 types of reliable information. The first is identity. Your baby's cry has a unique acoustic signature that is as individual as a fingerprint. That signature is present from birth. It remains stable across the first months of life, and research suggests it stays consistent into childhood and possibly into adulthood. Your baby's voice is already their own. Parents can recognize their own baby's cry with remarkable accuracy, not because of maternal instinct, because of exposure. The more hours you spend with your baby, the better you recognize their specific voice. Fathers who spend 4 or more hours a day with their babies recognize cries just as accurately as mothers. Fathers who spend less time score significantly lower. It is not gender, it is proximity and attention. That finding demolishes another myth while we are here. The idea that mothers are biologically wired to understand babies better than fathers. The data says it is time, not biology, that builds that recognition. The second type of reliable information in a cry is age. As babies grow, their cries change acoustically. They become more tonal and less shrill. The pitch patterns shift. The rhythm evolves week by week. This means your baby's cry at 2 weeks sounds measurably different from their cry at 2 months. Not because they are saying different things. Because their vocal apparatus is physically maturing and their brain is developing. So the cry tells you who is crying and roughly how old the crier is. It does not tell you why. That is not a failure of the baby. That is simply not what the cry evolved to do. Think of it this way. A fire alarm does not tell you whether the fire is in the kitchen or the bedroom. It does not tell you whether someone left the hob on or whether a candle tipped over. The alarm tells you one thing. Something needs your attention right now. The cry is the alarm. You are the detective, and you already have the tools to solve the case. You just do not know you have them. Here's what I mean. When Rachel stood in that hallway at 2 in the morning listening to Isla, she was trying to decode the sound, but the sound was never the right source of information. The context was. Rachel already knew that Isla had last eaten 3 hours ago. She knew the room temperature had dropped because the heating timer switched off at midnight. She knew Isla had been fighting a cold all week. That information was more valuable than any app could ever provide. Because the cry was the alert, and Rachel's knowledge of her daughter's day was the actual decoder. She just did not trust it because nobody told her to. This is the core mistake parents make with crying. They listen harder when they should think wider. The answer is almost never in the pitch or the rhythm or the volume of the cry itself. The answer is in the last feed time, the nappy, the room temperature, the time since the last nap, whether the baby was overstimulated before bed, whether there has been a change in routine that day. You are already collecting this data constantly without realizing it. Every time you change a nappy, you note the time. Every feed is logged in your memory or your phone. You know your baby's schedule better than anyone. The cry is not a code to crack. It is a prompt to run through your mental checklist. And when you frame it that way, the pressure disappears because you are not failing to translate. You are simply investigating. Now let me explain why this matters for your baby's brain. Because how you respond to crying affects something far deeper than whether the baby stops crying in that moment. It affects how their stress system develops. Inside your baby's brain, there is a system called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When your baby experiences distress, this system releases a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is the body's chemical alarm signal. In small doses, cortisol is normal and healthy. It helps the body respond to genuine threats. But when cortisol floods an infant's brain repeatedly without relief, it begins to affect the physical architecture of the brain. Research has shown that prolonged unattended crying can overstimulate the brainstem, the part of the brain that controls adrenaline release. When this system is activated too often, it can become permanently overactive. That means a child whose cries were routinely ignored in infancy may grow up with a stress response that fires too easily and too often, not because of their personality, because of how their brain was wired during a critical window. The cortisol also affects the sections of the brain responsible for emotional attachment. When those regions are not stimulated through responsive caregiving during infancy, they may not develop the connections they need to function properly. This is not about being a perfect parent. Nobody responds to every cry instantly. Life happens. Showers happen. Older siblings happen. The research is about patterns, not individual moments. Repeated neglect, not occasional delay. But here's the part that connects back to what we discussed about cry translation. When parents believe they should know why their baby is crying, and they cannot figure it out, some of them shut down. They feel so overwhelmed by their inability to decode the cry that they stop trying. They close the door. They put in earplugs. They tell themselves the baby needs to self-soothe. And sometimes that response comes from shame, not strategy. The cry translation myth does not just misinform parents. It can actually drive the exact parenting behavior that is most harmful to infant brain development. Not because parents are bad, because they were given the wrong framework. When you understand that nobody can decode a cry from sound alone, the shame evaporates. You are not failing. The task was impossible. And once the shame is gone, you can respond to the cry for what it is. A call, not a test you are failing, not a language you should speak. A call from a small person who needs you close. The specific reason matters less than the response. Pick them up, hold them, run your checklist, try things, feed them, check the nappy, check the temperature, rock them, talk to them. Move to a different room. Sometimes nothing works immediately, and that is also normal because sometimes babies cry, and there is no fixable cause. Sometimes they are processing the overwhelming sensory experience of being alive in a world they have only known for weeks. That is not a problem to solve, that is a discomfort to accompany. Your presence is the response. Let me talk about what changes as your baby grows. Because the trap tightens at specific ages, and if you know where it tightens, you can avoid falling in. The first squeeze happens in the first 2 weeks. Newborns cry an average of 2 hours per day. That number feels enormous when you are living it, but the crying is mostly reflexive at this stage. The baby's nervous system is adjusting to life outside the body. The trap here is expecting yourself to fix every cry immediately. In the first 2 weeks, your baby is calibrating. They are adjusting to temperature and light and sound and gravity and the absence of constant fluid pressure. Your job is not to stop the crying. Your job is to be there during it. Hold them. Let them feel your heartbeat. Let your warmth regulate their temperature. Let your breathing rhythm influence theirs. Presence is the intervention. The second squeeze comes between 6 and 8 weeks. This is when crying peaks. Research consistently shows that babies cry the most during this window. Some babies cry for 3 or more hours per day at this age. Parents often panic at this stage because the crying increases and they assume something is going wrong. They think the baby is getting worse. They think they are doing something wrong. They start frantically searching online for answers. But the peak is developmental. It is not a sign of failure. The baby's nervous system is maturing, and the crying is part of that process. It will decrease. It always decreases. Knowing that the peak is temporary changes everything. The third squeeze happens around 4 months. This is where Illa was when Rachel stood in that hallway. At 4 months, babies begin to cry more interactively. The cries become more varied and more social. The baby starts using different sounds in different contexts. Not because the sounds mean specific things, but because the baby is experimenting with their voice. They are learning that sound produces a response from you. This is actually a milestone. Your baby is discovering cause and effect through their own voice. But parents experience it as confusion because the cries sound different and they think they should be able to decode each one. The fourth squeeze comes between 8 and 10 months when separation anxiety begins. Now the baby cries specifically when you leave the room. This cry feels different to parents because it seems personal and directed. And it is personal and directed. But it is not manipulative. It is developmental. The baby has learned that you exist when you are not visible, but they have not yet learned that you will come back. That gap is terrifying for them. Every single one of these stages has a parenting industry product designed to exploit the anxiety it creates. A swaddle for the newborn phase, a colic device for the peak phase, an app for the interactive phase, a training program for separation. None of these products address what is actually happening in your baby's brain. They address what is happening in your wallet. The real intervention at every stage is the same thing it has always been. Responsive presence. Now let me give you something practical. Because understanding the science is important, but you need to know what to do at 3 in the morning when you have had 40 minutes of sleep and the baby will not stop. Step 1. Hear the cry as an alarm, not a question. You do not need to answer why. You need to respond that you are here. Pick the baby up. Hold them against your chest. Let them feel you breathing. Step 2. Run the checklist. When did they last eat? When was the nappy last changed? What is the room temperature? How long since the last nap? Is anything physically wrong? A hair wrapped around a toe? A scratchy label? Step 3. If the checklist produces a likely answer, try it. Feed them, change them, adjust the temperature. If none of those work, move to comfort measures. Rocking, gentle bouncing, white noise, a change of room or position. Step 4. If nothing works, hold them anyway. Your presence is not a failure to find the answer. Your presence is the answer. Sometimes the baby needs to cry in the safety of your arms, and that is enough. Step 5. Monitor yourself. This is the step nobody talks about. If you feel your frustration rising, put the baby down in a safe place and step away for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Then come back. That is not abandonment. That is regulation. A dysregulated parent cannot regulate a dysregulated baby. Your emotional state transfers directly to your child through your muscle tension, your breathing rate, and your heart rhythm. Calming yourself first is parenting, not selfishness. Let me return to Rachel for a moment. After 3 months of using apps and books and devices, she deleted everything. She uninstalled the apps. She returned the cot sensor. She stopped reading about cry types entirely. Instead, she started paying attention to one thing: context. She kept a simple log on her phone: feed times, nap times, nappy changes, room temperature, nothing else. No interpretations, no theories, just times and facts. Within 2 weeks, she noticed patterns. Isla almost always cried 40 minutes after being put down. If the room temperature dropped below 19 degrees, she almost always cried 90 minutes after her last feed in the evenings. Rachel did not decode the cry, she decoded the schedule. And once the schedule made sense, the crying made sense. Not every time, not perfectly, but enough to stop the panic and replace it with a working hypothesis. That is what responsive parenting actually looks like. Not a mother who magically knows. A parent who pays attention and tries things and adjusts and pays attention again. The loop is the skill, not the instant knowing. There is one more thing the research revealed that I want you to hear. The study found that a parent's ability to recognize their own baby's cry improves dramatically with time spent together. Not weeks of time, hours of time. 4 hours a day with your baby was the threshold where recognition accuracy matched the highest levels recorded. 4 hours. That is not about being a stay-at-home parent. That is about being a present one during the hours you have. And this applied equally to fathers and mothers. The biological sex of the parent made no measurable difference when the time spent was equal. What matters is not who you are. It is how often you show up. So if you are a parent who works long hours and you feel disconnected from your baby's cries, the answer is not an app. The answer is time. Even small increases in direct contact hours measurably improve your recognition and your confidence. Your baby already knows your voice from inside the body. They recognized you before they were born. Now they need you to learn theirs. Not what their cry means, who their cry belongs to. That recognition is the foundation of everything. Let me address one more myth before we move on. The idea that responding to every cry will spoil a baby. That picking them up teaches them to cry more. That you are creating a rod for your own back. The developmental research on this is clear. Babies whose cries are responded to consistently in the first year actually cry less in the second year. Not more, less. Responsive parenting builds security, and security reduces the need to signal distress. A baby who knows their calls will be answered develops what psychologists call a secure attachment style. They learn that the world is responsive and that their needs matter. That internal model becomes the template for every relationship they form. A baby whose cries are routinely ignored develops an insecure attachment. They learn either to cry harder and louder, hoping eventually someone responds, or to stop crying entirely, because crying achieves nothing. Both outcomes are harmful. The child who cries harder becomes the toddler with intense emotional outbursts. The child who stops crying becomes the toddler who seems eerily calm, but is actually emotionally shut down. Neither outcome is what any parent wants. Responding to cries does not create dependency. It creates the neurological foundation for independence. A child who feels secure enough to explore the world does so, because someone answered when they called. That is not spoiling. That is building now. I want to talk about what happens to parents, because the impact of crying is not one-directional. The baby cries and something happens in your brain too. Something powerful and ancient and completely involuntary. When a parent hears their baby cry, their brain activates regions associated with motor planning. The brain is literally preparing the body to move toward the baby before the conscious mind has decided what to do. That is not instinct in the way people romanticize it. That is a neurological reflex. Your brain hears a distress signal from a voice it recognizes, and it fires up the systems needed to physically respond. Stand, walk, reach, hold. But here's what cortisol does to that system. When a parent is chronically stressed, their own cortisol levels rise. And research has shown that elevated maternal cortisol reduces activation in those motor planning regions during infant crying. In other words, stress makes it harder for your brain to respond to your baby's cry. Not because you're a bad parent, because cortisol is literally dampening the neural circuits that drive your caregiving response. That same study found that higher parental cortisol was associated with more intrusive parenting behavior, meaning stressed parents are more likely to handle their babies roughly or respond in ways that are reactive rather than soothing. This is why parental support matters as much as baby support. Sleep deprivation and isolation and financial stress and relationship strain all raise cortisol. And elevated cortisol undermines the exact brain systems you need to parent responsively. If you are struggling to respond to your baby's cries with patience, the problem might not be your character. It might be your cortisol. And the solution is not to try harder. It is to get help so your own stress levels come down. Ask someone to take a night shift. Accept the meal someone offered. Let the house be messy. Sleep when the baby sleeps, even though everyone says that and it feels impossible. Reduce your cortisol so your brain can do its job. Let me bring this together. Your baby's cry is not a code. It is not a language with a dictionary. It is not a test you are supposed to pass. It is a signal that evolved for one purpose only: to bring you closer. That is all it was ever designed to do. Bring the caregiver closer to the infant so the infant survives. The cause of the cry is secondary to the function of the cry, and the function is proximity. Every product that tells you otherwise is selling a solution to a problem that does not exist. You do not need to translate your baby. You need to be near your baby. The translation happens through presence and context, not through sound analysis. Rachel told me something recently that stayed with me. She said once she stopped trying to decode Isla's cries and started just showing up, everything changed. Not the amount of crying, the amount of panic. The crying was the same, but Rachel was different. She was calmer, more patient, more present, because she had stopped performing a test she could never pass and started doing the one thing that actually worked: being there. Isla is 7 months old now. She still cries. She cries when she is hungry and when she is tired, and when Rachel leaves the room, and sometimes for no reason that anyone can identify. That is normal. But when Isla cries, Rachel does not reach for her phone. She reaches for Isla. She picks her up and holds her and runs through the checklist, and sometimes the answer is obvious, and sometimes it is not, and either way, Isla feels held. That is responsive parenting, not knowing. Responding. The difference between those two words is the difference between shame and confidence, between paralysis and action, between a parent who is drowning and a parent who is swimming. If you are watching this at 3 a.m. with a crying baby in your arms, I want you to hear this clearly: you are not failing. The cry is not a question you are supposed to answer correctly. The cry is your baby saying, "I need you close." And you are close. You are watching this video with them in your arms. You have already done the most important thing. You showed up. Everything else is investigation, not intuition. Delete the apps. Return the devices. Stop reading the charts that match cry sounds to causes. None of them work. What works is you, your attention, your checklist, your patience, your willingness to hold your baby when you do not know why they are crying. That willingness is not a weakness. It is the single most protective thing you can offer your baby's developing brain. Every time you hold them through a cry, you are building neural pathways that will serve them for the rest of their life. You are teaching their stress system that distress is survivable and that help exists. You are teaching their attachment system that people are reliable. You are teaching their brain that the world responds when they call out. That is what your baby's cry is really telling you. Not what they need in that specific moment. Something bigger, something simpler, something you already know how to give. Stay close. I need you here. Do not leave. And every time you answer that call, you are not just soothing a baby, you are building a person. Subscribe so I can keep showing you what your child's brain is really doing. because once you see it, you cannot unsee it.